Welcome to Elizabeth's Stories. Today we follow Margaret Thompson, a devoted mother-in-law, as she uncovers her daughter-in-law's shocking deception, saves her son from financial ruin, and finds resilience. Subscribe and hit the bell for weekly tales of truth and triumph. Share your thoughts below. Let's start the story. The air in my modest apartment was heavy with the scent of lavender and old books, a faint comfort against the chill of an autumn evening. I stood at my ironing board, smoothing the creases from my favorite navy dress, the one with delicate white flowers that James, my son, always said made me look like a lady from a forgotten era. The clock on the mantel ticked toward 6, and I was due at James's house for dinner in an hour. It was a ritual I cherished, a rare chance to sit with my only child and his new wife, Cassandra, whose laughter had brought light to our small family after years of shadowed grief. I was humming an old tune, lost in thoughts of the evening ahead, when my phone buzzed on the counter. The screen glowed with a message from Robert Mitchell, my attorney, of 15 years. His words were stark, urgent. "Margaret, call me immediately." "It's serious." My fingers froze on the iron, the steam hissing like a whispered warning. Robert never texted after hours, not since the day he called to tell me my husband Henry had slipped beyond saving his heart, failing in the quiet of our old home. I set the iron down, my hands trembling, and dialed his number. The phone rang twice before his voice cut through sharp and taut. "Margaret, are you alone?" "Yes," I said, glancing at the empty room. The yellow walls I'd painted to chase away loneliness seemed to mock me now, their cheerfulness garish under the dim light. "What's wrong, Robert?" "Sit down," he said, his tone carrying the weight of something unspeakable. I sank onto the edge of my bed, the quilt my mother had stitched decades ago soft beneath my fingers. "It's about Cassandra, your daughter-in-law." My heart lurched. "Cassie, what about her? She's not who she says she is." His words landed like stones in still water, rippling through me. "There's no record of a Cassandra Williams at Children's Hospital, no trace of the life she's told you about. Margaret, the woman your son married is a lie." I laughed, a brittle, nervous sound that echoed in the quiet. "That's impossible, Robert. I've known her for over a year. She's a pediatric nurse. She grew up in Colorado, lost her parents in a car crash. She's—" My voice faltered as I pictured Cassie's warm, hazel eyes, her gentle hand squeezing mine as she called me Mom Thompson. She'd been a beacon in my widowed life, a daughter I'd never had. "Margaret, Robert," said, his voice softening but firm. "My investigator was updating your insurance policies as you asked." He dug deeper into her background. "There's no Cassandra Williams. Not at the hospital, not in Colorado, not anywhere. You need to go to James's house now. Don't call ahead. Don't let her know you're coming." The line went silent, but his words lingered, curling like smoke in my mind. I stared at the phone, my pulse a frantic drumbeat. Outside, the maple tree swayed in the evening breeze, its leaves whispering secrets I'd never thought to question. Cardinals darted to the feeder I'd hung last winter, their fleeting visits a reminder of how fragile trust could be. I slipped into my dress, the fabric cool against my skin, and grabbed my coat. The drive to James's house was 20 minutes, but it felt like an eternity. The city blurred past neon signs flickering like false promises, the hum of traffic, a distant roar. My hands gripped the steering wheel knuckles, white as Robert's warning echoed. "She's not who she says she is." How could I have been so blind? Cassie had woven herself into our lives with such care, her stories so vivid, her affection so convincing. She'd sat at my kitchen table sipping coffee, her laughter filling the empty spaces Henry's death had left behind. She'd been the one to suggest I sell my house, her voice soft with concern. "Mom Thompson, this place is too much for you now. Let us help you start fresh. I'd believed her. I'd sold the house where I'd raised James, where I'd tended my garden through decades of joy and sorrow. The $50,000 I'd given them for their dream wedding had seemed a small price for their happiness. But now, as I navigated the familiar streets to their suburban home, doubt gnawed at me. Had I been too eager for connection, too desperate to fill the void of my solitary years? The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the road. I thought of James, my brilliant, driven son, now 42, who'd found love after years of focusing on his career. Cassie had seemed like a miracle, a woman who adored him, who embraced me as family. But Robert's words twisted that image into something sinister. What if every smile, every kind word, had been a performance I pulled into their driveway, the gravel crunching under my tires? Their house glowed in the twilight, its manicured lawn and elegant landscaping a testament to the life they'd built with my money. Through the front window, I saw them moving in the kitchen, James chopping vegetables, Cassie stirring something on the stove. They looked like a perfect couple, a postcard of domestic bliss. But as I sat in my car, engine idling, a chill settled over me. The scene felt staged, like a play I'd been invited to watch without knowing the script. I turned off the ignition and stepped out, my heels clicking on the pavement. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke. I clutched my purse where my phone held Robert's text, a silent accusation. I didn't know what I'd find inside, but I knew one thing: the truth was waiting, and it wouldn't be kind. The doorbell chimed, a melodic sound that felt too cheerful for the storm brewing in my chest. James opened the door, his broad smile as familiar as my own reflection. "Mom, you're early." He pulled me into a hug, his warmth a fleeting comfort against the dread coiling inside me. At 42, he was still my little boy, his dark hair flecked with gray, his eyes crinkling with a joy that now seemed fragile. "Thought I'd surprise you," I said, forcing a smile. My voice sounded steady, but my heart raced. I stepped inside, the scent of garlic and tomato sauce wafting from the kitchen. Cassie appeared, wiping her hands on a floral apron, her blonde hair pulled into a perfect bun. "Mom Thompson," she exclaimed, her voice bright as she hugged me. "I'm so glad you're here. Dinner's almost ready." Her embrace was warm, her smile radiant, but I couldn't shake Robert's words. I studied her face, searching for cracks in the mask I'd never noticed before. Her hazel eyes met mine, and for a moment I doubted everything. Could this woman who'd brought me flowers on my birthday, who'd laughed over old photo albums with me, be a lie? "Thank you, dear," I said, my tone carefully neutral. "It smells wonderful." "Cassie's making her famous lasagna," James said, leading me to the living room. He looked tired. I noticed not just the weariness of a long workday, but something deeper etched into the lines around his eyes. "Everything okay, honey?" I asked, settling onto the couch. "Just work," he said, waving a hand. "Consulting's been brutal lately." But his smile didn't reach his eyes, and I wondered what else he wasn't saying. Cassie bustled back to the kitchen, calling over her shoulder. "Want some wine? Mom Thompson, I opened that Pinot Grigio you brought last time." "Sure." I called back, my gaze drifting around the room. The house was impeccable, decorated in soft grays and whites with modern art and sleek furniture. But something struck me as off. There was no trace of James here. No football memorabilia from his college days. No antique clock from his father. No painting he'd loved from our old home. It was as if Cassie had erased him, reshaping their life to fit her vision. "Cassie's got quite the eye for decorating," I said, testing the waters. James glanced around as if seeing the room for the first time. "Yeah, she says my old stuff made it look like a bachelor pad." His voice carried a hint of unease. a tone I recognized from his childhood defending a choice he wasn't fully sure of. I nodded, my mind racing. Robert's warning echoed, "She's not who she says she is." I wanted to tell James everything to pull him aside and lay bare the truth, but I needed to be sure, needed to see more. The weight of what I was about to uncover pressed against my chest, a storm gathering on the horizon. As we sat waiting for dinner, the house felt different, like a stage set for a drama I hadn't rehearsed. Cassie's laughter drifted from the kitchen bright and practiced, and I wondered how many times I'd mistaken calculation for warmth. I glanced at James, his shoulders slumped, his gaze distant. He didn't know yet, but I did. The perfect life we'd believed in was unraveling thread by thread. The road to James's house stretched before me, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the twilight. Streetlights flickered like distant stars, their glow casting fleeting shadows across my dashboard. My hands trembled on the steering wheel, Robert's words looping in my mind like a chant from some forgotten ritual. She's not who she says she is. The air inside my old sedan felt thick, as if the truth itself was pressing against me, demanding to be acknowledged. I tightened my grip, forcing myself to focus on the drive, but my thoughts drifted backward, pulling me into the labyrinth of memories where Cassandra had first woven her spell. It was a year ago, almost to the day when James brought her to my house for the first time. I'd been nervous, fussing over the table settings, arranging wildflowers for my garden in a chipped vase. James had been single for so long, consumed by his consulting firm, that I'd begun to fear he'd never find someone to share his life with. Then came Cassandra, stepping into my living room, like a burst of sunlight, her smile warm enough to melt the frost of my widowed years. "Mrs. Thompson," she'd said, her voice soft but clear, "I've heard so much about you. I'm so happy to finally meet James's mom." She'd insisted I call her Cassie, her hazel eyes sparkling as she complimented my home, the creaky hardwood floors, the faded wallpaper, the garden I'd tended since Henry's passing. She'd moved with an effortless grace, her blonde hair catching the afternoon light like spun gold. I'd felt an instant kinship, as if she'd been sent to fill the hollow spaces left by loss. Over coffee that day, she'd shared stories of her life growing up in a small Colorado town, losing her parents in a tragic car accident at 25, working her way through nursing school to become a pediatric nurse. Her voice trembled when she spoke of her parents, and I'd reached across the table to squeeze her hand, my heart aching for her. Looking back, I saw the cracks I'd missed. Her stories were vivid but oddly vague. No specific names, no childhood friends, no mention of the hospital where she worked beyond a few generic anecdotes. I'd chalked it up to grief, to her desire to focus on the present. But now, as I drove through the darkening streets, those gaps felt like shadows cast by a carefully constructed facade. Cassandra had become a fixture in our lives with startling speed. She'd call me on quiet afternoons, her voice bright over the phone. "Mom Thompson." She'd say the nickname wrapping around me like a warm shawl. "How about we bake those cookies James loves? I want to learn your recipe." We'd spend hours in my kitchen, flour dusting our hands, her laughter filling the air as we swapped stories. She'd listen to my tales of raising James, of Henry's quiet humor, with a patience that felt like a gift. I'd been alone for 15 years, my world narrowed to my garden and the occasional visit from James. Cassie's attention was a balm, a reminder that I could still be part of something vibrant. But it was her suggestion to sell my house that had changed everything. It was a crisp spring morning, the kind where the air smells of new beginnings. We sat at my kitchen table, sunlight streaming through the window, glinting off the coffee mugs. "Mom Thompson," she'd said, her tone gentle but earnest, "this house is so beautiful, but it's a lot to manage alone. And honestly, the neighborhood isn't what it used to be." She'd leaned forward, her eyes wide with concern. "James and I worry about you here. What if you sold it? You could get a cozy apartment closer to us, and we'd see you all the time." I'd hesitated, my fingers tracing the grain of the table where James had carved his initials as a boy. This house held 37 years of memories, James's first steps. Henry's laughter, the garden where I'd scattered his ashes. But Cassie painted a picture of freedom, of a new chapter unburdened by maintenance and loneliness. "We're planning the wedding," she'd continued, her hand covering mine. "It's going to be expensive, and we want it to be perfect. If you sold the house, you could help us start our life together, and you'd have a place with us always." Her words had felt like a promise, a vision of family I hadn't dared hope for. I'd nodded, my heart swelling with the thought of being closer to James, of being needed again. The house sold quickly, fetching $50,000, more than I'd expected. I gave James and Cassie $50,000 for their wedding, a lavish affair with white roses, a string quartet, and a dress that made Cassie look like a vision from a fairy tale. I'd moved into a small apartment, painting the walls yellow to chase away the ache of leaving my home. The remaining money, I'd told myself, would see me through retirement, supplemented by Henry's life insurance and our savings. Now, as I turned onto James's street, the memory of that decision felt like a stone in my chest. Had Cassie's concern been a performance? Her warmth? A calculated act? The thought made my stomach churn, but I couldn't dismiss it. Robert's warning had cracked open a door I had kept firmly shut. And now every moment with Cassie felt suspect. I remembered a day last summer when Cassie had come to my apartment, unannounced, a basket of peaches in her arms. "I saw these at the market and thought of you," she'd said, her smile disarming. We'd sat on my tiny balcony peeling fruit, the juice sticky on our fingers. She'd asked about my life with Henry, about our travels, our dreams. I'd shared stories I hadn't told anyone in years, my voice soft with nostalgia. She'd listened so intently, her eyes glistening as if she felt my loss. But now I wondered, had she been studying me, cataloging my vulnerabilities? Had those peaches been a prop in her carefully staged play? The more I thought, the more I saw the patterns I'd ignored. Cassie never spoke of her own past in detail. When I'd asked about her nursing school friends or her colleagues at the hospital, she'd deflect with a laugh, saying she preferred to live in the moment. "The past is heavy, Mom Thompson," she'd said once, her voice wistful. "I like to keep things light." I'd thought it profound, a sign of resilience. Now it felt like a shield, a way to keep me from looking too closely. There was a night, too, when James had been out of town for work, and Cassie invited me to dinner at their house. The table was set with my old china, a wedding gift I'd given them, and she'd cooked a meal that felt like a memory roast chicken, just like Henry used to love. We'd talked for hours, her questions gentle but probing about my finances, my plans for retirement, whether I'd considered leaving James an inheritance or spending my money while I was still here. "You deserve to enjoy it, Mom Thompson." She'd said, her voice warm. "But James would be so secure if you planned for him, too." I'd brushed it off, thinking she was just being thoughtful. Now those questions felt like threads in a web, each one pulling me closer to her design. As I neared James's house, the streetlights dimmed, as if the world itself was holding its breath. I thought of the wedding, the moment I had watched James and Cassie dance under a canopy of fairy lights. Her dress had shimmered, her laughter infectious, and I'd felt a surge of gratitude for her presence in our lives. I'd given them $35,000 for that day, a sum I'd justified by the joy in James's eyes. But the remaining $15,000, where had it gone? Cassie had mentioned honeymoon expenses, house improvements, but the details were vague, slipping through my fingers like smoke. The driveway loomed ahead, the house glowing like a lantern in the dusk. I parked behind James's BMW, my heart pounding. The truth was a shadow at the edge of my vision, elusive but undeniable. I'd been a widow for 15 years, my world narrowed to the quiet rhythms of survival. Cassie had swept in like a warm breeze, promising family connection, love. But what if it had all been a lie? What if every moment I'd cherished was a step toward betrayal? I stepped out of the car, the evening air sharp against my skin. The scent of wood smoke lingered, mingling with the faint perfume of roses from their garden. Through the window, I saw James and Cassie moving in the kitchen, their silhouettes soft against the warm light. They looked so ordinary, so happy, but Robert's words clung to me like damp fog. She's not who she says she is. I clutched my purse, the phone inside a silent witness to the unraveling truth. As I walked toward the door, a memory surfaced, sharp and unbidden. It was a moment from last winter when Cassie had come to my apartment during a snowstorm. She'd brought a scarf, a soft blue thing she said reminded her of my eyes. I saw it and thought of you, she'd said, wrapping it around my shoulders. I'd worn it all season, a talisman of her affection. But now I wondered, had it been a gesture of love or a calculated move to bind me closer? The scarf was still in my closet, a relic of a trust I could no longer afford. I rang the doorbell, the chime echoing like a warning bell. James opened the door, his smile wide but weary. "Mom, you're early," he said, pulling me into a hug. His warmth was real grounding, but I couldn't shake the sense that I was stepping into a house of mirrors where nothing was as it seemed. Cassie appeared behind him, her apron dusted with flour, her smile as bright as ever. "Mom." "Thompson, you're here," she said, hugging me with a warmth that felt both familiar and foreign. I returned the embrace, my arms stiff, my mind wretched. Her perfume was floral cloying, like a garden hiding thorns. As I followed them inside, the house felt different. Its elegance, a mask for something darker. The walls seemed to whisper, urging me to look closer, to see what I'd missed. I glanced at James, his shoulders slumped, his eyes shadowed. He didn't know yet, but I did. The woman he loved was a stranger, and I was the one who would have to shatter his world. The door clicked shut behind me, sealing me into James and Cassandra's world, a world that now felt like a stage. Its every detail meticulously arranged to conceal a truth I was only beginning to grasp. The scent of garlic and simmering tomato sauce hung in the air, mingling with the faint floral trace of Cassandra's perfume. It was a house of warmth, of curated perfection. But beneath the surface, something stirred like a current rippling under still water. My heart thudded, Robert's warning echoing in my ears. She's not who she says she is. I clutched my purse, the weight of my phone inside it, a silent anchor to the reality I was about to face. James led me into the living room, his steps heavy, his smile strained. "Make yourself at home, Mom," he said, gesturing to the sleek gray couch. His voice carried a weariness I hadn't noticed before, a shadow that clung to him like dusk. At 42, he was still my boy, tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes that held the same curiosity he'd had as a child. But tonight, those eyes were dim-clouded by something deeper than a long day at the office. "Everything all right, honey?" I asked, settling onto the couch. The cushions were firm, unyielding, as if they too were part of Cassandra's carefully crafted aesthetic. "Just work," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "You know how it is, deadlines, clients, the usual chaos." But his words felt rehearsed, a script he'd recited too many times. I studied him, noting the lines etched deeper around his mouth, the way his shoulders slumped, as if carrying an invisible weight. Cassandra emerged from the kitchen, her floral apron a stark contrast to the tailored jeans and silk blouse beneath it. She looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine, Her blonde hair swept into a low bun, her smile as bright as the chandelier above us. "Mom Thompson, can I get you that wine?" she asked, her voice a melody of warmth. "The Pinot Grigio's chilling just for you." "Yes, please," I said, forcing a smile. Her warmth was disarming, almost enough to make me doubt Robert's words. Almost. But as she turned back to the kitchen, her movements fluid and practiced. I caught a flicker in her eyes, a momentary sharpness like a blade catching the light. It was gone in an instant, replaced by her usual charm, but it lingered in my mind, a warning I couldn't ignore. I glanced around the living room, my gaze snagging on the details I'd overlooked before. The space was immaculate white walls adorned with abstract art, a glass coffee table gleaming under the soft glow of recessed lights. But there was nothing of James here, no trace of the football trophies he'd won in college, no sign of the antique clock Henry had left him, no hint of the painting he'd loved from our old house, a moody landscape of a stormy sea that had always spoken to him. It was as if Cassandra had erased him, reshaping their home into a reflection of her alone. Cassie's done wonders with this place. I said my tone carefully neutral. It's so polished. James followed my gaze, his brow furrowing as if seeing the room for the first time. "Yeah, she's got a vision," he said, his voice tinged with something I couldn't quite place, a pride, perhaps, or unease. "She said my old stuff made it look cluttered like a bachelor pad, wanted a fresh start." I nodded, my fingers tightening around my purse. A fresh start. The phrase echoed heavy with meaning I hadn't questioned until now. Had Cassandra's vision been about building a life with James, or something else entirely? Something calculated, predatory, hidden behind her perfect smile. She returned with the wine, setting a glass in front of me with a flourish. "Here you go, Mom Thompson. Dinner's about 20 minutes out. Lasagna's in the oven." She sat across from me, her posture relaxed, but her eyes alert, watching me with a subtle intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. "How's the apartment treating you?" "Settling in, okay." "It's cozy," I said, sipping the wine. It was crisp, perfectly chilled, but it tasted sharp against the knot in my throat. "I miss the garden, but it's nice to be closer to you two." Her smile widened, but it didn't reach her eyes. "We're so glad you're nearby. It means the world to James." She reached for his hand, her fingers brushing his with a tenderness that felt rehearsed. James smiled, but it was a ghost of his usual warmth, and I wondered how much of his exhaustion was work and how much was her. The room felt smaller, the air charged with an unspoken tension. I wanted to pull James aside to spill Robert's revelations and shake him awake to the truth. But Cassandra's presence was a barrier, her gaze a silent challenge. I needed to tread carefully to find a crack in her facade without alerting her to my suspicions. "James," I said, keeping my voice light, "can we talk for a minute? Just you and me. I wanted to ask about that presentation you mentioned last week." Cassandra's head tilted, a flicker of something annoyance perhaps crossing her face before she smoothed it away. "Everything okay?" she asked, her tone sweet, but edged with curiosity. "Fine, sweetheart," I said, matching her smile. "Just mother-son stuff. You know how I worry about his work stress." Her eyes narrowed so slightly I might have missed it a year ago. But now I was looking for the tells, the subtle shifts in her performance. "Of course," she said, rising. "I'll check on the lasagna. Don't be too long, you don't want it to get cold." As she disappeared into the kitchen, I caught a glimpse of her shadow lingering in the doorway as if she were listening. James stood gesturing toward the hall. "Want to see my new office setup? Cassie got me this ridiculous computer, says it's for my consulting work." I followed him, my heels clicking on the hardwood floor, each step echoing like a heartbeat. The house felt alive, its walls whispering secrets I was only beginning to hear. James's office was the one room that still felt like him bookshelves lined with business texts, a framed photo of us from his college graduation, a worn leather chair that had been Henry's. I closed the door behind us, the click loud in the quiet. James, I said, my voice low. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. How much do you really know about Cassie's past? He sank into the chair, his expression shifting from confusion to something heavier, relief, perhaps, as if I'd voiced a question he'd been too afraid to ask himself. Why, Mom? What's going on? Answer me first. I pressed my heart pounding. What do you know about her background, her family, her childhood, her work? He stared at his hands, his fingers twisting together. She grew up in Denver, lost her parents in a car accident when she was 25, worked her way through nursing school, moved here 3 years ago for a fresh start. His voice was steady, but doubt crept into it, a crack in the foundation of his belief. Have you ever seen pictures of her family? I asked. Her childhood home, her nursing school graduation. He hesitated, his gaze drifting to the photo on his desk. She says it's too painful to talk about. The accident was traumatic. She doesn't like dwelling on it. I stepped closer, my voice barely above a whisper. Have you ever visited her at the hospital? Met her colleagues? She says they have strict policies about visitors in the pediatric ward. He said, his words slowing, as if he were hearing them for the first time. She takes calls in private patient confidentiality. You know, Mom, you're scaring me. What's this about? I pulled out my phone, my fingers trembling as I opened Robert's text thread. My attorney had an investigator look into Cassie's background for some insurance paperwork. James, there's no record of a Cassandra Williams ever working at Children's Hospital. The color drained from his face, his eyes wide with a mix of disbelief and dawning horror. That's impossible. She gets calls from the hospital. She talks about her patients all the time. When have you actually heard these calls? I asked, my voice steady, despite the storm inside me. Have you seen her in her scrubs heading to work? Met anyone she works with? He opened his mouth, then closed it, his gaze dropping to the floor. She takes the calls in the other room, says it's about privacy. I've never... His voice trailed off, and I saw the realization hit him sharp and merciless. Mom, what are you saying? I'm saying... I said, my voice trembling, now that the woman you married might not be who you think she is. Robert's investigator found no trace of her at the hospital, no record of her in Colorado. James, we need to talk about what this means. Before he could respond, a sharp chime cut through the air, the kitchen timer followed by Cassandra's cheerful voice. Dinner's ready. She called, her tone bright, but carrying an edge like a blade wrapped in silk. James looked at me, his eyes those of the 8-year-old boy who'd once come to me after a fight with a bully searching for answers. What do I do? He whispered. We go eat dinner, I said, forcing calm into my voice. And we act normal until I figure out how to tell you the rest. We stepped into the hall, the air thick with unspoken truths. Cassandra stood at the stove, her back to us, stirring a pot with a precision that felt almost mechanical. Her posture was too rigid, too alert, and I knew she'd heard more than we thought. The dining room table was set with my old china, the plates gleaming under the chandelier's soft light. Fresh flowers sat in a crystal vase, their petals too perfect, like props in a play. Cassandra turned her smile as radiant as ever, but there was a tightness to it, a crack in the mask I hadn't seen before. This looks wonderful, dear, I said, taking my seat. My voice was steady, but my pulse raced. I was playing a role now, just as she was, and the stakes were higher than I'd ever imagined. I wanted it to be special, Cassandra said, her eyes flicking between James and me. James has been so stressed lately. I thought a family dinner would help. Her words were warm, but they felt calculated, each one chosen to maintain the illusion. As we began eating, I watched her closely. Every gesture, every glance, every word. She cut her lasagna with surgical precision, her movements graceful but deliberate, like a dancer performing a routine she'd rehearsed 1,000 times. James ate in silence, his fork moving mechanically, his eyes avoiding mine. The tension in the room was a living thing coiling tighter with each passing moment. "So, Mom Thompson," Cassandra said, her tone light but pointed. "How's the apartment? I hope you don't regret selling the house." The question hung in the air, a challenge disguised as concern. I set my fork down, meeting her gaze. "It's been an adjustment," I said carefully. "But I've been thinking about the house lately, about the money from the sale." James looked up, his brow furrowing. "What do you mean?" "Well," I said, keeping my voice conversational, "you said the wedding cost $47,000, and I gave you $35,000. But the house sold for $50,000 total. What happened to the other $15,000? Silence fell heavy and suffocating. James's fork paused, his eyes darting to Cassandra. She froze her fork halfway to her mouth, her smile faltering for a fraction of a second. There were other expenses," she said, finally, her voice smooth but strained. "The honeymoon, some house improvements, my student loans." "Student loans?" I asked, tilting my head. "I thought you worked your way through nursing school." Another pause, longer this time. "I did," she said, her tone tightening. "But I had to take out loans for the last year. My savings ran out." James set his fork down, his expression shifting to confusion. "Cassie, you never mentioned student loans. When we applied for the mortgage, you said you had no debt." Her hand twitched, the mask slipping just enough for me to see the panic beneath. "I was embarrassed," she said, reaching for his hand. "You were doing so well, and I didn't want you to think less of me. But where are the loan statements?" James pressed, his voice rising. "I handle our finances now. I've never seen any payments." Cassandra pulled her hand back, her smile gone. "I need to check on dessert," she said abruptly, standing and disappearing into the kitchen. The air felt heavier in her absence, the truth pressing closer. James turned to me, his voice a whisper. "Mom, what else did Robert find?" I hesitated, glancing toward the kitchen. The sound of running water and clinking dishes drifted out, but it felt too quiet, too staged. "Her real name is Catherine Blackwood," I said, keeping my voice low. "She's not 38 like she told you. She's 34. She's been married twice before, both times to men she drained financially before disappearing." James stared at me, his face pale, his eyes wide with disbelief. "That can't be right. She loves me. I know she does." "James," I said, my heart breaking for him. "She's a professional. She studies men like you, successful, lonely, vulnerable. She becomes what you need, marries you, and takes everything she can." From the kitchen, the sounds stopped. The silence was deafening, a void that swallowed the room. James's head turned toward the doorway, his voice tentative. "Cassie, everything okay?" No response. A chill ran through me, sharp and cold. "James," I said, my voice barely audible, "where does she keep her purse?" On the counter by the door, he said, his eyes narrowing. "Why?" We stood moving quietly toward the kitchen. It was empty, the back door slightly ajar, a cool breeze stirring the curtains. Cassandra was gone. The dining room was a study in perfection, a tableau that could have been plucked from a dream. The table gleamed under the chandelier's soft glow, its crystal facets scattering light like stars trapped in glass. My old china wedding gifts I'd passed to James and Cassandra, shone with a polished elegance, each plate framed by silver cutlery and crisp linen napkins. A vase of fresh roses, their petals blood red against the white tablecloth, stood as the centerpiece, their scent mingling with the rich aroma of lasagna baking in the oven. It was a scene of domestic bliss, meticulously crafted, yet it felt like a stage set for a performance I was only now beginning to understand. I sat across from James, my hands folded in my lap to hide their trembling. Cassandra stood at the head of the table, her floral apron a charming contrast to the designer jeans and silk blouse beneath. Her smile was radiant, her blonde hair catching the light like a halo, but her eyes held a sharpness that cut through the warmth, a predator's gaze cloaked in sweetness. "This looks wonderful, dear," I said, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. Robert's warning pulsed in my mind. She's not who she says she is. Every gesture, every word was now suspect, a thread in a tapestry of deception I was determined to unravel. "Thank you, Mom." "Thompson." Cassandra said, her voice a melody of affection as she served the lasagna. "I wanted tonight to be special. James has been so stressed with work, and I thought a family dinner would lift his spirits." She glanced at him, her hand brushing his arm with a tenderness that felt rehearsed, a choreographed move in a play I hadn't been given the script for. James managed a smile, but it was brittle, his eyes shadowed with the exhaustion I'd noticed earlier. He picked up his fork, his movements mechanical, as if he were playing a role he no longer believed in. The air was thick with unspoken tension, a current that seemed to hum beneath the table, vibrating through the china and silver. I sipped my wine, the Pinot Grigio sharp on my tongue, and studied Cassandra. Her every move was deliberate, cutting her lasagna with surgical precision, her smile flickering like a candle flame in a draft. She was watching me, too, her gaze darting to mine when she thought I wasn't looking. "So, Mom." "Thompson." She said, her tone light, but edged with something I couldn't quite name. "How's the apartment? I hope you don't regret selling the house." Her words were casual, but they landed like a stone in still water, rippling with intent. It was a challenge, a test to see how much I knew. I set my glass down, meeting her eyes. "It's been an adjustment," I said carefully, my voice calm, but probing. "The apartment's cozy, but I have been thinking about the house lately, about the money from the sale." James paused, his fork hovering over his plate. "What do you mean, Mom?" he asked, his brow furrowing. His voice carried a note of unease, as if he sensed the ground shifting beneath him. I kept my gaze on Cassandra, watching for the telltale signs I'd missed for so long. "Well, I said my tone conversational. You said the wedding cost $47,000 and I contributed $35,000, but the house sold for $50,000 total. What happened to the other $18,000? The room went still." The silence heavy as a drawn curtain. James's fork clinked against his plate, his eyes darting to Cassandra. Her smile faltered just for a moment, her fork frozen halfway to her mouth. The roses seemed to lean closer, their scent suddenly cloying, as if the air itself were complicit in her deception. There were other expenses," she said, finally, her voice smooth but strained like a violin string stretched too tight. "The honeymoon, some house improvements, my student loans." "Student loans?" I asked, tilting my head, my voice light, as if I were merely curious. "I thought you said you worked your way through nursing school." Her eyes flicked to mine, a flash of panic breaking through her composure. "I did." She said, her words coming too quickly. "But I had to take out loans for the last year. My savings ran out." James set his fork down, his expression shifting from confusion to something sharper doubt. "Cassie, you never mentioned student loans." He said, his voice low but firm. When we applied for the mortgage, you said you had no debt. The mask slipped just for a heartbeat. Her hand twitched, her fingers tightening around her napkin, and I saw it, the raw, unguarded panic of someone caught in a lie. I was embarrassed. She said, her voice softening as she reached for his hand. You were doing so well financially, James. I didn't want you to think less of me. But where are the loan statements? He pressed, pulling his hand away. I handle our finances now. I've never seen any payments going out. The silence that followed was a living thing coiling around us like a serpent. Cassandra's smile was gone, her eyes darting between us, calculating. I leaned forward, my heart pounding, but my voice steady. Cassie, dear. It's just that $15,000 is a lot of money. Surely there's paperwork receipts, something to show where it went. Her gaze locked onto mine, and for a moment I saw something else in her eyes. Not the warm daughter-in-law I'd thought I knew, but a stranger cold and unyielding. I must have misplaced the documents, she said, her voice tight. I'll find them later. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I need to check on dessert. She disappeared into the kitchen, leaving a void in her wake. The roses seemed to wilt slightly, their petals curling inward as if recoiling from the tension. James stared at his plate, his hands clenched in his lap. Mom, he whispered, his voice barely audible. What else did Robert find? I glanced toward the kitchen where the sound of running water and clinking dishes drifted out, too deliberate, too staged. Her real name is Catherine Blackwood, I said, keeping my voice low. She's 34, not 38. She's been married twice before, both times to men whose bank accounts she drained before vanishing. James's face went pale, his eyes wide with a mix of disbelief and dawning horror. That can't be right, he said, his voice shaking. She loves me. I know she does. James, I said, my heart breaking for him. She's a professional. She studies men like you, successful, lonely, vulnerable. She becomes what you need, marries you quickly, and takes everything she can. The kitchen sounds stopped, the silence sudden and oppressive. James's head turned toward the doorway, his voice tentative. Cassie. Everything okay in there? No response. The air grew colder, the chandelier's light flickering as if stirred by an unseen hand. I felt a chill sharp and primal, as if the house itself were holding its breath. James, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Where does she keep her purse? On the counter by the door, he said, his eyes narrowing. Why? We stood moving silently toward the kitchen. My heels clicked softly on the hardwood each step, a heartbeat echoing in the quiet. The kitchen was empty, the back door slightly ajar. A cool breeze stirring the curtains like ghostly fingers. Cassandra's purse was gone. The counter was bare except for her phone lying next to a half-empty glass of wine, its screen glowing faintly in the dim light. She's gone, James said, his voice hollow. He stepped toward the door, peering into the backyard. The darkness seemed to swallow the light, the shadows shifting as if alive. Her car's still here. She probably has another one parked nearby. I said, my mind racing. I picked up her phone, my fingers brushing the cold glass. It wasn't locked, a red flag I had missed until now. The call history was sparse, but the text messages told a different story. I opened the app, my breath catching as I read the exchange with someone named Marcus. The old lady's getting suspicious. One message read, timestamped yesterday. How much longer do I need to keep this up? The account in Phoenix needs more time, Marcus replied. Don't rush it. And then from earlier today, emergency. She hired a PI. Need extraction plan now. My blood ran cold. I showed the screen to James, his face paling as he read over my shoulder. She was planning to leave, he whispered, his voice breaking. She was going to take everything. I scrolled to the Photos app, my heart pounding. It was nearly empty, but there were screenshots, bank statements, insurance documents, investment accounts, all belonging to James. She's been documenting your assets, I said, my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. Planning her final withdrawal, James sank into a chair, his hands trembling. How long was she going to wait? He asked, his voice barely audible. I thought back to the past week when Cassandra had pressed James to update his life insurance policy. She mentioned it last week, didn't she? I said. Said it was important for married couples to make each other beneficiaries. She even had the forms ready. He nodded, his eyes distant. She wanted to do it tonight. Said it was romantic. His voice cracked, the word romantic heavy with irony. I looked at the phone again, scrolling through the messages. Another text from Marcus caught my eye. The sister in Phoenix is ready. Move the money by next week. Sister. Cassandra had told us her sister died in the car accident with her parents. Another lie. Another piece of the puzzle falling into place. James. I said, my voice firm. We need to call Robert. And the police. He nodded, but his gaze was fixed on the phone, on the evidence of a life built on deception. I thought I knew her, he said, his voice raw. I thought she loved me. I reached for his hand, squeezing it tightly. She's very good at her job, I said, echoing Robert's words. But we're going to stop her. The kitchen felt colder now, the shadows deeper, as if the house itself were mourning the betrayal. I stepped to the back door, peering into the yard. At the far end, near the fence, a figure moved swiftly through the darkness, a fleeting silhouette gone before I could be sure. She's running, I said, my voice steady despite the fear clawing at me. James stood, his expression hardening. What do we do now? We call Robert, I said, pulling out my phone, and we make sure she doesn't get away with this. As I dialed Robert's number, the roses on the table seemed to wilt further, their petals curling inward like secrets refusing to be told. The house was quiet, but it felt alive with the weight of what we'd uncovered. Cassandra, or Catherine Blackwood, had played her role to perfection, but the curtain was falling. I wasn't just a grieving widow anymore, nor a naive mother-in-law. I was Margaret Thompson, and I was ready to fight for my son, for the truth, for the life we'd almost lost to her lies. The kitchen was a hollow shell, its warmth drained by Cassandra's absence. The back door hung ajar, letting in a chill that curled around my ankles like a warning. Her phone lay on the counter, its screen a faint glow in the dim light, a silent witness to the lies we'd uncovered. James stood beside me, his face pale, his eyes fixed on the empty yard where Cassandra Catherine Blackwood had vanished into the shadows. The roses on the dining table seemed to droop further, their petals curling inward as if recoiling from the truth. The house felt alive, its walls whispering secrets that had been hidden too long. James, I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. We need to call Robert. Now. I reached for my phone, my fingers brushing the cold metal of the counter. The air was thick, charged with the weight of betrayal, and I felt a fire kindling within me, a resolve I hadn't known I possessed. James nodded, his hands trembling as he picked up Cassandra's phone. And the police, he said, his voice raw. We need them here. She can't get away with this. I dialed Robert's number, the familiar tone ringing in my ear like a lifeline. He answered on the first ring, his voice taut with urgency. Margaret, are you at James's house? Yes, I said, glancing at the open door. She's gone. Robert. She ran. We found her phone, texts, photos, proof she's been planning this for months. Stay there, he said. I'm calling Detective Rodriguez. She's with the Financial Crimes Unit. Don't touch anything else until she arrives. And Margaret, be careful. This woman is dangerous. The call ended, leaving a silence that pressed against my skin. James stood frozen, staring at the phone in his hand, its screen illuminating his face with a ghostly light. She was going to take everything he whispered, his voice breaking. My money, my life. How did I not see it? I placed a hand on his shoulder, my heart aching for him, because she was good, James. Too good. But we see her now, and we're going to stop her. Within 20 minutes, the police arrived, their lights casting blue and red shadows across the manicured lawn. Detective Rodriguez, a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s with a no-nonsense demeanor, stepped into the kitchen, her presence grounding the chaos. She examined Cassandra's phone, her expression hardening as she scrolled through the texts. "Mrs. Thompson," she said, her voice calm but heavy. "You've likely saved your son from losing everything. These marriage fraudsters move fast once they have legal access to assets." James sat at the kitchen island staring at a stack of insurance forms Cassandra had left on the counter, forms she'd urged him to sign that night, calling it romantic to make each other beneficiaries. She was so insistent, he murmured, his fingers tracing the paper. Said it was about love, about securing our future. I snorted, the sound sharper than I intended. Nothing says "I love you" like $1 million life insurance policy. Detective Rodriguez's lips twitched, a ghost of a smile. "Mrs. Thompson, you have a knack for cutting through the nonsense. We'll need you to work with our financial crimes unit. Your attorney's investigation has given us a head start, but we need to trace the money and identify other victims." "Other victims?" I asked, the words hitting me like a cold wind. "How many are there?" She hesitated, her eyes meeting mine with a weariness that spoke of too many cases like this. "Based on what your investigator uncovered, possibly dozens. Catherine Blackwood has been running this scheme for at least 8 years across 4 states: Colorado, Arizona, Utah, and now New Mexico." James's head snapped up, his voice barely a whisper. "Dozens." Rodriguez nodded, setting the phone down. "She targets successful men, often recently widowed or divorced men who are lonely but have assets. She studies them, becomes their ideal partner, marries them quickly, and starts siphoning money. Your mother's contribution from the house sale made you a bigger target than most." I felt sick picturing other families torn apart, other mothers who'd given their savings for their children's happiness, only to watch it vanish into a predator's hands. "What are the chances we'll get the money back?" I asked, my voice steady despite the rage simmering beneath. Slim Rodriguez admitted, "These operations move money through multiple accounts, often offshore. But with what we've got here, her phone, your investigator's findings, we might stop her from hurting others." As Rodriguez spoke with her team, I stepped into the living room, needing a moment to breathe. The space felt different now, its elegance a mockery of the life James had thought he'd built. Cassandra's coffee mug sat on the side table, its rim stained with her lipstick perfectly preserved, as if she'd just stepped away. Her sweater was draped over the couch, soft and inviting, a relic of the woman who'd never existed. I picked it up, the fabric cool against my fingers, and felt a surge of anger, not just at her, but at myself. How had I missed the signs? The vague stories, the convenient deflections, the way she'd always seemed to know exactly what I needed to hear. James joined me, his face etched with pain. "Mom," he said quietly, "did you ever really like her? Or did something always feel off?" I thought carefully, the truth, a tangled knot in my chest. "I wanted to love her," I said finally. "She was everything I thought you needed, warm, attentive, kind. But there were moments, little things I ignored. She never shared specific stories about her childhood, never had friends call or visit. I told myself I was being paranoid, an overprotective mother-in-law." He nodded, his eyes distant. She said she liked to live in the present, not dwell on the past. I thought it was healthy. It was careful, I corrected my voice firm, and we mistook careful for admirable. My phone buzzed, Robert's name flashing on the screen. I answered his voice, cutting through the haze. Margaret, the investigator, found something else. Can you and James come to my office first thing tomorrow? What kind of something else? I asked. My heart sinking, the kind that'll make you angry, he said. Bring James, and be ready for a fight. The call ended, leaving a chill in its wake. I looked at James, his face a mirror of my own resolve. We're not done yet, I said. Whatever Roberts found, we'll face it together. The next morning, Robert's office was a war room, papers strewn across every surface, the air thick with the scent of coffee and ink. A man I didn't recognize sat at the conference table, his laptop surrounded by manila folders and photographs. He stood as we entered his handshake firm, his eyes sharp with purpose. Mrs. Thompson, Mr. Thompson, I'm Detective Frank Morrison, Multi-State Financial Crimes Task Force. Robert gestured for us to sit, his expression grim. Margaret James. Your decision to investigate Cassandra or Catherine Blackwood may have cracked open the biggest marriage fraud operation we've seen in a decade. Morrison spread out a series of photographs, driver's licenses, and wedding pictures across the table. Each image featured the same woman, Cassandra or Catherine or someone else entirely, her hair changing from blonde to brunette to red, her smile constant, but her name different in every frame. Catherine Blackwood, alias Cassandra Williams, alias Christine Wilson, alias Carol Warner. Morrison said, his voice steady but urgent. 4 known identities, likely more. 17 confirmed victims across Arizona, Colorado, Utah, and New Mexico. James stared at a wedding photo, Catherine radiant in a white dress beside a man who wasn't him. How long has she been doing this? He asked, his voice barely audible. Our earliest case dates back 9 years, Morrison said, consulting his notes. But we suspect she's been refining this scheme longer. She's meticulous, studies her targets, tailors her persona, moves fast. Total take, conservative estimate, 2.3 million. The number hung in the air, a physical weight. James made a choked sound, his hands clenching into fists. 2.3 million, he repeated, his voice hollow. Morrison nodded. But your case is different. In every other instance, she disappeared within 6 to 8 months of marriage. With you, she stayed nearly a year. That suggests she was planning something bigger. Bigger how, I asked, though a sinking feeling told me I already knew. Morrison's eyes met mine, his expression grim. You, Mrs. Thompson, you were the long-term target. The house sale, the $50,000 you contributed, it was just the start. Our analysis shows she was angling for your savings, your husband's life insurance payout, your entire estate. The room went silent, the air heavy with the weight of realization. James turned to me, his eyes wide. Mom, you didn't tell me you had more saved. I didn't want you to feel guilty. I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Your father's life insurance and our retirement savings were substantial. The house money was extra. I told you it was most of what I had to make it easier for you to accept. Morrison pulled out a financial report, sliding it across the table. Catherine spent months setting this up. She met James right after his promotion was announced in a business journal. She researched your family, learned about your husband's payout, your property value, your close relationship with James. Every move was calculated. I stared at the documents, my mind flashing back to those coffee mornings with Cassandra. Her gentle questions about my finances, my retirement plans, my thoughts on inheritance. I'd thought she was being thoughtful, a daughter-in-law who cared. Now I saw the truth. She'd been weaving a web, each question a thread, pulling me closer to her trap. "So what now?" James asked, his voice rough with anger and betrayal. Morrison leaned forward, his eyes intense. "We set a trap. Catherine's pattern suggests she won't walk away from a prize like your mother's savings, $300,000 according to our estimates. She's likely still watching, waiting for a chance to come back." "No way," James said, his voice rising. "I won't let Mom be bait for this." "The monster." "It's not your choice," I said, surprising myself with the steel in my voice. "It's mine." The room went quiet, all eyes on me. I felt a shift within me, a spark of something fierce and unyielding. For 15 years, I'd been Margaret Thompson, the widow, the mother, the woman who'd given up her home for her son's happiness. But now I was something more, a protector, a warrior, ready to face the shadow that had invaded our lives. Mrs. Thompson Morrison said, his tone respectful. "This isn't without risk. But if you're willing, we can use your involvement to lure her back. She'll think she still has a chance to access your money." "What makes you so sure she'll try again?" James asked, his voice tight. Robert slid another file across the table. "Because she never got the main prize." "Margaret, show James your bank statements." I hesitated, then handed over the folder I'd brought at Robert's request. James opened it, his eyes scanning the numbers. "Mom, this shows you have over $300,000 as savings and investments." I thought the house was most of what you had." I let you think that I said, my voice soft but firm. "I didn't want you to feel burdened. Your father and I planned well. The house money was just a piece of it." Morrison nodded. "Catherine spent months positioning herself to access these funds. She's not going to walk away from $300,000 without a fight, especially since she doesn't know how much you've uncovered." "But she overheard us last night," James said, his brow furrowing. "She ran when we started talking." "Did she?" I asked, my mind turning. "She fled when she heard us in the office, but she doesn't know the extent of what Robert found. For all she knows, we only have suspicions." Morrison smiled, a rare crack in his serious demeanor. "Exactly. And that's our advantage. Mrs. Thompson, we'll have you reach out through a mutual contact, a nurse at the hospital where she claimed to work, someone we've identified as part of her network for false references. You'll play the concerned mother-in-law worried about your son's marriage, wanting to help fix things." I nodded, the plan taking shape in my mind. It was simple, elegant, and dangerous. I'd play the role of the naive, loving mother-in-law, dangling the promise of my savings to draw Catherine back. But this time, I'd be the one setting the trap. "There's something else," I said, my voice quiet but steady. All three men turned to me, their expressions expectant. "Last week, Cassie asked about my estate planning. She said she was worried about James's financial security if something happened to me. Suggested I include provisions for his spouse in my will." Morrison's eyes lit up, a spark of recognition. She was setting up the end game, likely planning an accident down the line after she'd secured your assets and James's. James went pale, his hands gripping the table. "Mom, you can't do this. It's too dangerous." I looked at him, my son who'd been manipulated and betrayed by the woman he loved. "James," I said, my voice unwavering, "I've been handling dangerous situations longer than you've been alive. I raised you, didn't I? And right now, I'm the only one who can stop her from doing this to someone else." The room was silent, the weight of my words settling over us. Morrison nodded, a flicker of respect in his eyes. "We'll set it up carefully, Mrs. Thompson. You'll be protected every step of the way." As we left Robert's office, the morning sun felt too bright, the world too ordinary for the darkness we'd uncovered. I glanced at James, his face a mix of anger and determination. "We're going to get through this," I said, squeezing his hand, "and we're going to make sure she pays." That night, I sat in my apartment, the yellow walls no longer a comfort, but a reminder of the life I'd tried to build after Henry's death. The scarf Cassandra had given me lay folded in my closet, its blue threads a symbol of the trust I had misplaced. I thought of the other victims, men like James, families like ours, caught in her web. But I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was Margaret Thompson, and I was ready to fight. The air in my apartment felt heavy, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. The yellow paint I'd chosen to brighten my new life now seemed to flicker in the dim light of my desk lamp, casting shadows that danced like specters across the room. I sat at my small dining table, a cup of chamomile tea cooling in my hands, its steam curling upward like a whispered prayer. Detective Morrison's plan was simple but perilous. I would play the role of the concerned mother-in-law desperate to save her son's marriage and lure Catherine Blackwood back into our lives. The thought sent a shiver through me, not of fear, but of resolve. I was no longer just Margaret Thompson, the widow who'd given up her home for a lie. I was a mother, a protector, and I was ready to end this. Morrison had outlined the plan in Robert's office that morning, his voice steady, but laced with caution. Catherine's greedy, he'd said, his eyes meeting mine across the cluttered table. "She's been watching you, Mrs. Thompson, waiting for a chance to access your $300,000. We'll give her that chance on our terms." The bait was a carefully crafted message sent through a nurse named Lila Harris, a contact Morrison's team had identified as one of Catherine's unwitting accomplices. Lila had provided false references for Catherine's nursing credentials, believing her to be a colleague in need of a fresh start. I'd drafted the email myself, my fingers trembling as I typed, "Lila, I'm worried about Cassie and James. I know she's been distant, but I want to help fix their marriage. Can you reach out to her? I'd do anything to keep them together, even share my savings to help them start fresh." The words felt like a betrayal of everything I'd learned, but they were deliberate, a lure designed to appeal to Catherine's greed. Morrison assured me the email would reach her through Lila's forwarded contacts, monitored by the task force. "She'll bite," he'd said, his voice grim. "She always does when the prize is big enough." Now, as I sat in my apartment, the silence was oppressive, broken only by the faint ticking of the clock on the mantel. It was the same clock I'd kept from my old house, its steady rhythm a reminder of the life I'd left behind. The scarf Catherine had given me, soft blue, a supposed token of affection, lay folded in my closet, a relic of the trust I had misplaced. I hadn't worn it since the night she fled, but its presence lingered, a ghost of the woman I'd thought she was. My phone buzzed, the screen lighting up with a new email. My heart lurched as I opened it, expecting a response from Lila. Instead, it was from an unfamiliar address. CMW 1978, securemail.com. Mail to CMW 1978, securemail.com. The subject line read simply, "I'm sorry." I hesitated, my finger hovering over the screen, then opened the message. "Dear Mom Thompson, I know I left abruptly. Things got overwhelming and I needed space. I'm so sorry for worrying you and James. I love him more than anything, and I want to make this work. Can we meet to talk? Just you and me somewhere quiet. I'm staying at a friend's place in town. How about the Willow Cafe tomorrow at 2 p.m.? I promise I'll explain everything. Love, Cassie." The words were a masterclass in manipulation, each one dripping with sincerity I now knew to be false. I forwarded the email to Morrison, my hands steady despite the rage simmering beneath my skin. Within minutes, he called. "That's her," he said, his voice taut with anticipation. "We've traced the IP to a public library downtown. She's careful, but not careful enough. Are you ready for this, Mrs. Thompson?" "I've been ready since the moment I saw her texts," I said, my voice firm. "What's the setup?" "We'll have plainclothes officers in the cafe posing as customers and staff," he said. "You'll wear a wire small enough she won't notice. We'll be listening, ready to move if she tries anything. Your job is to keep her talking, get her to admit to the fraud or her plans. If she senses a trap, she'll bolt." I nodded, though he couldn't see me. "I can do that. She thinks I'm just a worried old lady. Let's use that." Morrison's voice softened, a rare warmth breaking through. "Mrs. Thompson, you're not just anything. You're the key to stopping her. Stay sharp tomorrow." I hung up, the weight of the plan settling over me. The Willow Cafe was a quaint spot downtown, its ivy-covered walls and stained glass windows a perfect setting for Catherine's final performance. I pictured her there, her smile as polished as ever, spinning a new web of lies, but this time I'd be the one spinning the web, and I'd be ready. The next afternoon, I arrived at the cafe 10 minutes early, my heart pounding, but my steps steady. The air was crisp, the autumn leaves swirling across the cobblestone street like secrets scattered by the wind. I wore my navy dress with white flowers, the one James always said made me look timeless, and the blue scarf from Catherine, its threads a silent challenge. The wire was taped discreetly beneath my blouse, a faint pressure against my skin, a reminder of the role I was about to play. Inside the cafe was warm, filled with the scent of espresso and fresh pastries. The tables were scattered with customers, two men reading newspapers, a woman typing on a laptop, a barista wiping down the counter. Morrison had assured me they were his team, but they blended seamlessly into the scene. I chose a table by the window where the afternoon light filtered through stained glass, casting a kaleidoscope of colors across the wooden surface. It felt like a stage, the perfect setting for a confrontation that would end this charade. At exactly 2 p.m., the door chimed, and Catherine walked in. She looked different, her blonde hair now a warm auburn, her hazel eyes framed by glasses she'd never worn before. She wore a tailored coat and a scarf that mirrored mine, a calculated echo of the bond she'd once pretended to share. Her smile was soft apologetic, but her eyes were sharp, scanning the room before settling on me. "Mom Thompson," she said, her voice trembling with feigned emotion as she slid into the seat across from me. "I'm so glad you came. I've been a mess since I left." I returned her smile, my heart racing, but my expression calm. "Cassie," I said, using the name she'd chosen for this lie. I was so worried. "What happened? Why did you run?" She reached across the table, her hand brushing mine, her touch cool and deliberate. I panicked. She said, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "James and I had a fight, and I felt trapped. I know I shouldn't have left like that, but I needed time to think." I nodded, playing along, though every word felt like a blade. "A fight about what I asked, keeping my voice gentle. You two seemed so happy." Her gaze flickered, a momentary crack in her facade. "It was about money," she said, her voice low. "He thought I was hiding something about the wedding expenses. I didn't want to burden him with my debts. I asked, tilting my head like the student loans you mentioned." She hesitated, her fingers tightening around her coffee cup. "Yes," she said, her voice steadying. "I took out loans for nursing school, like I told you. I didn't want James to know how much I owed. It's embarrassing." The wire beneath my blouse felt heavier, Morrison's team listening to every word. I leaned forward, my voice soft but pointed. "Cassie, I'm trying to understand. You said you paid for nursing school yourself, working nights, and when you and James applied for the mortgage, you told him you had no debt. Which is it?" Her smile faltered. her eyes darting to the door, then back to me. I, I must have misspoken, she said, her voice tight. It's been a stressful time. I paid most of it off, but there's still a balance. I nodded, letting the silence stretch the air thick with tension. The stained glass light shifted, casting a crimson glow across her face, making her look like a figure from a myth, a siren caught in her own trap. What about the $15,000 from the house sale? I asked, my voice steady. You said it went to the honeymoon and house improvements, but I've seen your home, Cassie. There's no new furniture, no renovations. Where did the money go? Her hand froze her coffee cup halfway to her lips. For a moment, she was still her eyes locked on mine, and I saw it, the raw, calculating mind behind the mask. Mom, Thompson, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. You're asking a lot of questions. I thought you wanted to help us. I do, I said, my tone unwavering. That's why I'm here. I want to help you and James start over. I've got my savings, $300,000. I'd be willing to share it to give you both a fresh start. But I need to know the truth. Where did the $15,000 go? The cafe seemed to grow quieter, the hum of conversation fading as if the world were holding its breath. Catherine's eyes narrowed, a flicker of greed breaking through her carefully constructed sorrow. It went to Phoenix, she said, her voice barely audible. To my sister. She's been struggling and I sent it to help her. Your sister? I asked, my heart pounding. You told us your sister died in the car accident with your parents. Her face went pale, her lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. The silence was deafening, a chasm opening between us. I leaned closer, my voice low and steady. Cassie, or should I say Catherine Blackwood, I know who you are. I know about the other marriages, the other men, the $2.3 million you've stolen. And I know about Marcus. Her eyes widened, her composure shattering like glass. You don't understand, she said, her voice rising, a desperate edge to it. You think you've figured it out, but you have no idea what you're dealing with. Then tell me, I said, my voice calm but unyielding. Explain it to me, Catherine. Explain why you targeted my son, why you lied to us, why you tried to take everything we had. She stood her chair, scraping against the floor, her eyes darting to the door. You're making a mistake, she said, her voice cold now, the mask gone. You should have stayed out of it. Before she could move, the cafe door burst open and Morrison's team closed in two men from the corner table, the woman with the laptop, the barista dropping his rag. Catherine Blackwood, Morrison said, stepping forward, his badge gleaming in the stained glass light. You're under arrest for fraud, identity theft, and grand larceny. She froze, her eyes wild, searching for an escape that didn't exist. For a moment, I thought she'd run, but the officers were too quick, cuffing her wrists as she stood, her auburn hair falling loose, her glasses slipping down her nose. You can't prove anything, she hissed, her voice venomous. I'll be out by tomorrow. Morrison smiled, a cold, triumphant curve of his lips. We've got your phone, your texts, your bank records, and now your confession about the Phoenix transfer. You're done, Catherine. As they led her away, she turned her eyes, locking onto mine. There was no warmth there now, no trace of the daughter-in-law I'd thought I knew. You think you've won, she said, her voice low and sharp. But you'll never understand the game. I held her gaze, my heart steady, my resolve unbreakable. I don't need to understand it, I said. I just needed to stop you. The cafe door closed behind her, the chime a final note in her performance. I sank back into my chair, the wires still taped to my skin, the weight of the moment settling over me. The stained glass light softened the colors, warm and soothing, as if the world were exhaling. Morrison approached his expression one of quiet respect. You did it, Mrs. Thompson. We've got enough to put her away for years. I nodded, my hands trembling now that the adrenaline was fading. What happens now? I asked. We process her, build the case, reach out to the other victims, he said. You've given them a chance at justice too, and we'll work to recover what we can of your money. I thought of the $35,000 I'd given for the wedding. The $15,000 vanished to Phoenix, the savings Catherine had planned to steal. The money mattered, but not as much as the truth, not as much as James. I glanced out the window where the autumn leaves swirled free and untethered. I felt like those leaves released from the weight of deception, ready to move forward. 6 months had passed since the day Catherine Blackwood was led away in handcuffs, her auburn hair falling loose, her eyes burning with a defiance that no longer held power over us. The Willow Cafe, with its stained glass windows and swirling autumn leaves, felt like a dream, now a fleeting moment where I had stepped out of the shadows of my widowhood and into a strength I hadn't known I possessed. My apartment, once a symbol of loss, had become a sanctuary again, its yellow walls glowing softly in the morning light. The clock on the mantel ticked steadily, a reminder that time, like truth, moves forward, unyielding. I stood in my new garden, a small plot behind the house I'd bought with a portion of my savings. The roses I'd planted deep crimson, like those from James's dining table, were budding their petals, unfurling with a quiet promise of renewal. The air carried the scent of fresh earth and lavender, a balm for the wounds Catherine had left behind. I knelt, my hands sinking into the soil, and felt a peace I hadn't known in years. The scarf she'd given me was gone, donated to a thrift shop, its blue threads no longer a tether to her lies. James had moved forward too, though his scars ran deeper. He'd sold the house he'd shared with Catherine, unable to live in a space that felt like a stage for her deception. He'd rented a small condo downtown, closer to his office, and was rebuilding his life step by cautious step. We'd grown closer in these months, our bond forged anew in the fire of betrayal. He visited often, bringing coffee and stories of his shirk, his laughter a sound I cherished more than ever. This morning, he sat on my porch, a mug of coffee in his hands, his eyes brighter than they'd been in months. Mom, he said, his voice soft but steady. I got a letter yesterday from one of Catherine's other victims. I paused my trowel, hovering over a rosebush. What did it say? He pulled a folded envelope from his pocket, its edges worn as if he'd read it a dozen times. It's from a man in Colorado. His name's David. He said he lost everything, his savings, his trust, his sense of self when Catherine, or Christine as he knew her, disappeared with his money. He saw the news about her arrest, and he wanted to thank us, said it gave him closure, knowing she'd finally been caught. I set the trowel down, wiping my hands on my apron. How does that make you feel? I asked, studying his face. Relieved, he said, his gaze distant. Angry still, but also hopeful. Like, maybe I'm not alone in this. You're not, I said, sitting beside him, and neither am I. Detective Morrison had called last week with an update on the case. Catherine Blackwood, alias Cassandra Williams, and a dozen other names had been convicted on multiple counts of fraud, identity theft, and grand larceny. The trial had been swift, her phone and bank records a damning tapestry of her crimes. Morrison estimated that about 60% of the stolen funds could be recovered, a fraction of the $2.3 million she'd taken from her victims. For us, that meant a portion of the $35,000 I'd given for the wedding might return, though the $15,000 sent to Phoenix was likely gone forever. I didn't care about the money as much as I thought I would. What mattered was the truth, the justice, the chance to protect others from her web. The investigation had uncovered more than I'd expected. Catherine's sister in Phoenix was no sister at all, but a partner in her schemes, a woman named Elena, who handled the offshore accounts. Elena had vanished, but Morrison's team was closing in their net, tightening around the remnants of Catherine's network. The thought of others out there still spinning lies lingered like a shadow, but I pushed it aside. I'd done my part, and that was enough. I looked at James, his profile sharp against the morning light. "What's next for you?" I asked, my voice soft. He sipped his coffee, his expression thoughtful. "I'm focusing on work, rebuilding my savings, and I'm seeing a therapist, trying to understand why I fell for her, why I didn't see the signs." I nodded, pride swelling in my chest. "That's brave, James. It's not easy to face those questions." He smiled, a real smile this time, not the strained one he'd worn for months. "You taught me that, Mom. You didn't back down even when it hurt. You saved me." His words settled over me, warm and grounding like the soil beneath my hands. I thought back to the woman I'd been a year ago, lonely, trusting, eager to see good in everyone. Catherine had exploited that, weaving her lies into the fabric of my life. But in unraveling her deception, I'd discovered something else, my own strength, a resilience forged in loss and love. I'd been a widow, a mother, a gardener, but now I was more a woman who'd faced a predator and won. "I didn't just save you," I said, my voice steady. "I saved myself too." He reached for my hand, squeezing it gently. "What are you going to do with the money if it comes back?" I looked at my garden, the roses swaying in the breeze, their petals catching the light like tiny flames. "Some of it will go to the other victims," I said. "David and the others like him. They deserve a chance to start over, too. The rest, I'll use it to live. Really live. Maybe take that trip to Italy your father and I always talked about." James's eyes softened, a flicker of the boy I had raised shining through. "Dad would have loved that." We sat in silence, the morning unfolding around us. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of roses and possibility. The shadows that had haunted me, Catherine's lies, my own doubts, were fading, replaced by a quiet certainty. I'd trusted too easily once, but I'd learned to listen to my instincts, to see the truth beneath the surface. That was my power, hard-won and unshakable. As James left, promising to return for dinner next week, I walked back to my garden, the soil cool and yielding beneath my fingers. The roses were blooming now, their crimson petals, a testament to growth, to survival. I thought of Catherine, locked away, her schemes reduced to case files and courtroom testimony. I thought of David and the others whose lives she'd touched, their pain, a mirror to ours. And I thought of myself, Margaret Thompson, no longer defined by loss, but by what I'd gained: strength, clarity, a bond with my son that no lie could break. The sun climbed higher, its light spilling across the garden, chasing away the last of the shadows. I picked up my trowel, ready to plant another rose, another piece of my new beginning. The world was wide, and I was ready to meet it. Not as a widow, not as a victim, but as a woman who'd faced the darkness and found her way to the light.